Bible study.
I think we're not live yet, right?
Not yet, but we're getting ready to.
We're live now.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming back. Good evening to the Beit Tefillah Midrash kind of podcast style. I believe we are broadcasting today, probably on YouTube or Facebook or maybe both. So if you're watching from home, shalom, Shabbat shalom. It's good to have everyone. This is our 37th Sabbath since Sukkot. And as everyone's probably tracking, we've been reading through the New Testament. We call the Ketuvim Netzarim, or the Nazarene writings. And this week we read the books of Ephesians and Philemon. And we're going to talk about some of that right now. Anybody got any questions or anything before we get started? Or any issues to discuss? Okay. Well, Devarim 8:10 says, "When you have eaten and are satisfied, you will bless Adonai for the good land he has given you." So let's do that. Abba, Father, we have eaten and we're satisfied, and we thank you for the land in Yeshua's name. Amen. So Ephesians, we're talking about. Remember last week we talked and we said we were getting into a good amount of theology, how theology is derived, and you can base a lot of things, and we'll talk about some of that today. We're not going to get too deep into theology, so to speak, but you'll be able to see where much of it comes from. So let's get started on it. So starting at Ephesians 1:1 says, "Shaul, an emissary of Yeshua, Messiah, by the desire of Elohim to the set-apart ones who are in Ephesus and true to Messiah Yeshua." So the word emissary there, of course, in the Greek is apostolos. Hebrew, that would be shliach. In English, it's often translated as apostle. But truly, it all equates to sent out one, someone who was sent out to do this job. And like the leader of the Impact Community Center here they call him Apostle, right? So we just call him shliach, right? Of course. And so we say shliach Shaul, who was an apostle, the Apostle Paul. Any questions or anything? Anybody got anything different or you'd like to discuss about being a shliach? Do we have shliachim in Messianic Judaism? Have we ever heard of any? Someone call themselves a shliach?
No.
Yeah, I can't think of anybody who has. Most of us don't even want to be called anything. Some folks do. I mean, they seek after it. You can call me rabbi, but not me. I'm saying some folks say that. You just call me Uncle JD. Just kidding. All right, moving on. Ephesians 1:3 says, "Blessed be Elohim and the Father of our Master Yeshua Messiah, who has blessed us with every spiritual blessing in heavenlies in Messiah." Complete Jewish Bible says, "Blessed be Adonai, Father of our Lord." I have a misspelling there. It should be our Lord. So I want to point out that the word here is theos, which typically means God, at least throughout the Septuagint. Stern opines that the word God here, the word theos, is used here for God's personal name, which is typically Yod He Vav He in the Septuagint more than 250 times. I was not able to really verify that. I spent a lot of time, maybe a little too much time, in every occasion that I looked at, the word theos there would most likely be Elohim and not necessarily the set-apart name. I'm not saying Stern is wrong. I'm just saying that I personally wasn't able to verify his claim there. Has anybody else seen the word theos be substituted for Yod He Vav He?
Kurios and Greek.
Curious, yeah. So I'm not sure where he got that from, and Stern knows a lot more than I do. I'm just saying I wasn't able to verify what he was saying. Go ahead, sir.
Some of his stuff I did question. His translation, he uses I believe it's the Sinaiticus from the NIV. So I have problems with the NIV in this translation as far as clarity and being the same, unlike the Texas Receptus. So if it says it in the Testus Receptus, I'll go with
You
it.
feel pretty good about that?
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm not
It's really-
saying,
But it's really not really a matter of the translation, it's a matter of his interpretation of what it was trying to say. Because Greek doesn't usually have the name in it, so
Right.
he's making an interpretational point, not really a textual.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's what I was getting at. And he does have a lot of pretty good scholarly research and things that I do like. But on this one particular thing, I probably spent too much time looking for it because I really wanted to find someplace. And I have some pretty good software, Bible study software. I'm still learning how to use it. I have Logos 9. It's pretty decent, but it is geared heavily toward Christianity. So to use it for anything Jewish or Messianic it's pretty tough to navigate that way. So anyway, I just thought if anyone else had possibly studied this up, you could speak about it. So let's keep going. Also, I wanted to talk about that same verse here. There is some textual evidence that Ephesians has Semitic original, but most scholarly Messianic study seems to claim otherwise. I wanted to point out that this verse kind of reads like a Hebrew blessing that we say, "Blessed are you, Adonai, our Elohim, King of the universe." Blessed be Elohim and Father of our Master Yeshua. It kind of reads like a Semitic blessing that we do. 1 second. And coming back to it, but I'll say about having a Semitic origin here, we find pretty good evidence, but there's at least one guy, Messianic scholar, who says that almost nobody thinks that we had a Semitic original except hardcore Messianics who want it to be so. What do you think about that?
Well, I would have to agree. It's pretty hard just because you have one verse. And where I go with that is, how is the Greek laid out? And if it's coming from a Hebrew speaker, he's going to write it out in Greek like he would if he was doing Hebrew. That doesn't mean it was written Semitically. Say like Dutele, version of Matthew or Shem Tov. If it's just one verse.
Yeah.
If it's chapters that follow that pattern,
Or several clues.
yes, then I could see that.
Yeah, okay. What do you got?
Well, I think that when you look at the entire Trinity as a whole, yeah, we would like to find a Hebrew original for a lot of things. But in terms of look at the vast majority of people who read and study the New Testament aren't Messianics, right? And you can argue the other way. They're not Messianics, and they want to read everything as if the New Testament isn't Messianic and simple for them. So they're wanting it to be, but they can still eat pork and shrimp while also believing in this Jewish Messiah guy. So I think there's a little bit of it's you don't see the three fingers pointing back at you when you're saying that no, you want to believe it because they want to all believe the other way. Now, from a Messianic perspective, it's there are a lot of copies of the Greek text, but interestingly, the oldest complete Greek text is not much younger than the oldest complete Aramaic text. So even if even if the Greek was written first, then there was an Aramaic version of it very soon after that. You got to understand that Paul would be speaking to people in a language that that would really would show a closer detail of what the Messiah was teaching. So when you go back to Paul's letters, well, Paul's letters are written in places that are in Greek-speaking areas, but it doesn't mean necessarily that the language of his communications with them was in Greek, because it could be that they are still speaking in a Semitic language or thinking in that language. And so even if Paul is writing in Greek, his sentence structure is Aramaic.
Yes.
Or Hebrew in that sense. It's a Semitic sentence structure, even if the words are in Greek.
Right.
Thinking back to the Gospels, of course, even though the Gospels are written, everybody says they're written in Greek first, but they're at best a translation, right? Because Yeshua wasn't speaking Greek to Romans there. He was, or to his disciples. He was speaking in
Right.
Hebrew and or Aramaic.
Well, hence you have the clues like in Matthew where it says rabbi, that is to mean teacher. Well,
Right.
there's a clue there. I know that,
That includes,
If you
that
study-
includes translation, right?
right,
Yeah.
if you study languages, you find that there are clues, and not only clues, but sentence structure and things of this nature
Sure.
bleed out. Because your thought pattern is from your language.
Right.
So whether you write it or speak it, it's gonna be from yours.
And putting a clarification of what the word means is an indicator that you're translating it from a different language.
Right.
So,
Yeah, if you have to clarify it, that tells you something.
and I would say that the bottom line of why people want to have a Hebrew original or Aramaic or Semitic is because of Torah observance. Because the typical thought is that Greeks are Christians and they don't want Torah observance, and they're interpreting Paul in a way that is anti-Torah.
Exactly.
In other words, we're interpreting Paul in a way that the book of Acts doesn't exist.
Right.
When
Well,
Paul
I
is
was-
proving himself by the Nazarite vow and going to the temple to do a sacrifice, that would be opposite of what they want to believe. And therefore, Paul is no longer Jewish or keeping Jewish traditions or keeping the Torah. And so they're using Greek as a weapon to try and not do that.
Well, I was always taught, I was taught, for Christian theology to fit, to work, that means the new covenant had to be totally written in Greek, not without any Hebrew, in order to fit their doctrine. But it's been proven quite the opposite, in fact. There are especially the Gospels. I don't know about John, but I do believe Luke was, but I know Matthew for sure, written in Hebrew first, and then passed along. And I also believe that Revelations was also in Hebrew, and there's a few others. But aside from all that, if it was never written in Hebrew, but only in Greek, then it would fit their Christian doctrine, but because it's not, they got problems.
Well, even if it was written in Greek in the same way that the Septuagint was written in Greek as a translation,
I think it's still good enough.
it's still, if you understand Paul's Hebrew background, his Torah observance.
Yep.
If you let his Torah observance translate his writing, even in Greek, it comes up with a different non-Christian or
Right.
a pro-Torah story.
Sure.
Right.
No matter what language it's in English, you can say that too.
I'm saying in English.
Yeah, in
it's
English,
just
if you understand in English that Paul was a Torah observant Jew and interpret what he wrote to the background of, he's willing to go into the temple and do an animal sacrifice. He is so Torah observant. He is Torah observant in the sense that he is doing voluntary Torah observance.
Right.
Because a vow, by definition, isn't a requirement. So he is so Torah observant, he's willing to do a vow, complete a vow, and there's certain requirements of the Torah that involves animal sacrifice that he's willing to do to complete that vow.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if you have that Paul, you can't have a Paul that says, and you eat pork and shellfish.
Exactly.
I've got a comment here. Every time I hear someone ask like this question, like, is there, or make the claim there is an original Hebrew copy of the New Testament or whatever, the question I always ask is, what are we considering a copy, an original copy? Would we consider like a draft? Would we consider a piece? Are we talking about a whole manuscript? I mean, what are we calling an original? An original what? An original letter?
Well, I think what they're talking about when they say original is what language was it originally written in?
Yeah, but
So-
there are many different writers writing about the same thing. Are we talking about an original from Matthew, an original from Luke? Are we talking about an original from some other person?
Well, the only two books that I know, there are two books I know of that have a Hebrew text that very well could be original, could be the original version of that writing. That would be Matthew and the book of Hebrews, because there are Hebrew texts of that. There are Aramaic texts of all the other ones. and then the interpretation is which one was written first. So if you're looking at, because there are differences in some of the versions in the sense that some things written in Aramaic are not quite the same as those that are in Greek. And so you can look at Greek, because we can't think that Greek is monolithic either, because as Earl was talking about, there's more than one Greek text. The Textus Receptus is the most common, but it's or most numerous. It's not thought to be the oldest text. The oldest text is thought to be the Alexandrian text, which are less versions of it, and some parts are kind of missing or even questionable for that. And there is a Codex D or Beze, which is out there, and there's another one called majority text. So there are versions of the Greek text that, when you look at it in terms of why do these Greek texts differ in words? In other words, it's not just a scribal different letter; it's a different word there. And sometimes there's this thing called split words, that there are two Greek words that mean the same thing. That there's an Aramaic text that word can mean either one of those. So you can see that it's possible that a Greek translator looked at that word, and some translated it this way, and some translated it the other way. And that's the idea of an original Aramaic that was then translated into Greek. But I think we're talking about, let's say original copy. As far as I know, there aren't any surviving original writings. In other words, we don't have Paul's autographed version that we read today.
Yeah,
We don't have Moses' autographed version either.
Yeah, well, that's something that when I hear people say an
That was in
original
stone.
copy or the earliest manuscript, I'm like, okay, you're acting like we would
Moses didn't write the one that was in
like
stone.
there's some we would always we would find in a cave or something, we would find the first edition of the Gospels in Hebrew, leather bound or something.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was such a thing.
Copyright 78 Jerusalem.
Yeah,
How would
it's
you
like-
know it was the first?
That's what qualifiers we had. There were no publishing companies. There was no Library of Congress. If we even had an original, how would we know that was an original? I mean, it just seems like kind of a weird question when you really think about it. And I feel like sometimes it's kind of grasping at straws, not from a theological perspective, but just from a historical perspective, trying to make the faith more real by finding more historical evidence. When
Right.
if it's not real enough with what we have now, why is finding an older manuscript going to bolster our faith of it? And I'm not saying this I wouldn't like to see an older manuscript. I'm just saying what are people putting their faith in God, or are they putting it in history?
Well, there's just one more thing I'll let you talk. You can look at manuscripts and you can say, well, this one is newer, so therefore does that necessarily mean it's less reliable? It really depends on what it was copied from and how old that document goes back to. And that's really the argument for a Hebrew text of Matthew and a Hebrew text of Matthew and Hebrews, because they found them within Jewish writings that they're on the verge of being burned and destroyed by the Christian or Catholic leadership to burn all the texts in Hebrew about to be burned. They found these Gospels, the Gospel of Matthew, in that, a couple different variants of that, as well as the Hebrew text of Hebrews. So they are newer texts in the sense of the copies they have were not written that long ago, but you can't necessarily say that something is just a new copy just because the copy you have was written a copy more recent. It could be copied from something much further back.
I was going to say, the only thing that they've ever found that really is an original text for the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's an original to that area. So any of those that were copies were within themselves, they have their own scrolls. So
Right.
that's the only thing that I know of that's ever been found that's original Hebrew, and that's mainly of the Tanakh. So,
Well, I'd say it's probably, there are some stock in there, but it's mostly like their sectarian writings is what's there.
yeah, I was just trying to cover the gamut as much as possible. But I do agree with you, Wayne, on yours. I think instead of more being original, it's more about what was really said. So we have these different documents,
Yeah.
and we could try to figure out what was meant and what was said, so that we could get a correct understanding of where he was going.
Really kind of all those language things, I'll get to you in a second. I'm not
Yeah, this is great.
the language things
Your
fall.
face isn't saying that, but that's okay.
His face is just,
His face,
It's
he's
his resting
Wolverine, That's
face.
just normal.
The language thing should fall into the so
You
what
just smile
question,
more.
right? And
he's
the
like, "No,
differences
just
in the
resting angry
manuscripts.
face."
Do the differences in the manuscripts mean anything in
How
terms
did you
of
ever
how
grow
you
up
tackle it? I mean, that's ultimately the so what question is what it's easier to shed a lot of heat and less light, so to speak, by being angry about your particular text you want to defend. But really the so what question is there a difference in this statement or in this version that makes a difference in how you
Or
think
change
about
your
it?
belief or your way.
Yeah, and so one thing I can think of that does kind of go that way is, the Matthew 23 verse 2, right? Where Shem Tov has some edition, some version of Shem Tov has a different meaning than all the other, than the Greek text, the Aramaic text of Matthew.
Well,
In terms of who's in charge of,
I agree with you on that because I look at it, unfortunately, in my case, I was like the guy that was trying to prove his point. So not too long ago, I figured, you know what, instead of doing that, maybe I need to look for what the truth is. Instead of, here's my point, well, what's the actual truth?
Right. So be a Berean and study what it actually says, not try to defend a different point of view.
Right. Because I don't know.
Yeah.
I've come to that conclusion. Thankfully, my daughter and my wife have helped me see that through many years of
Tell me you don't know.
Careful, man.
careful what?
Another point of, not contention really, but, figuring out what was Greek and what was Hebrew is, and some of this may have come down to how it was spoken to whoever was writing it. There's quite a lot of Hebrew and Aramaic idiom that doesn't translate into
Right.
Greek very well. So when
Right.
it's written in Greek, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But,
Or a Hebrew or Aramaic word spelled out in Greek letters.
right, that too.
Transliteration.
Well, and so when you think of, like, for example, why do we have the word Maranatha in the Greek text?
Because it was transliterated.
Well, it was they clearly didn't translate Paul's words there, right? They kept it how Paul wrote it. They may have, did he write it the words Maranatha in Greek? I don't know. It seems to me that he wrote it himself, Maranatha, which is the Aramaic for our master comes. So it's one of those things where he was showing that he still was writing and thinking in non-Greek when he was writing that, in my thought. And so
The word hallelujah is another one.
yeah, same thing.
Yeah. Very good.
But it's very
And
common
amen.
to see that sort of thing with Semitic idioms in the text.
Exactly.
Which is one of the reasons why, I'm pretty sure that all the way back when they referred to the stable, it was most likely actually a sukkah, because the Greeks really didn't have a word for that. They knew tabernacle, but sukkah isn't the same word as tabernacle.
So CC says borrowed, share word, question mark. Yeah. So in other words, when there's not, just as Bill was saying just now, when there's not a word that covers it, or a word you want to be more original, use the original, the original text or original word.
Hence you get transliterations.
Yeah, and that's how you get transliterations, exactly, not translations of that. Same thing about the word baptism, for example.
It could have almost been like a catchphrase.
Mikvah was the Hebrew.
Could have been like a
Tefillah, I
catchphrase.
think would be better. Mikvah is the place, so to speak. Tefillah is the action.
Village action. Cool. That was a good discussion. So there are a number of textual clues. Now that we're going to talk just a little bit about that. There's a lot of Aramaic wordplay in Ephesians. Chapter 1, verses 12 and 13, chapter 2, verse 17, chapter 3, verse 8, and chapter 4, verse 2. And then, of course, the Aramaic idiom in Ephesians 1:18. We'll try to get to all of them. We have some things that I'll read through from Andrew Gabriel Roth here, some of his work. As we saw with the bad idiom transfer of Matthew 23:8, rabbi equals teacher, or my great one, a frequent problem that the Greek redactor has is making Semitic idioms flow better in his language. The difference being that, while many scholars are ready to acknowledge a strong Aramaic influence, to say the least, in the Gospels, many of these same authorities draw the line at the epistles. The reason for doing so are at least partially understandable, however, since there are clear cases where Paul refers to himself as a Roman citizen and apparently had the ability to converse with a wide group of empire officials who surely would have had little fluency in Hebrew or Aramaic. However, what is often overlooked in such an analysis is once again the concept I referred to in my previous book as commercial fluency versus sacred choice. By this term, I mean the following: that what the Jews did to get by as a matter of necessity must wholly be separated out from what they do in terms of sacred ritual and scripture. As an example of this fact, I pointed out the reality that in synagogues in Paris, Warsaw, and New York might give sermons in their local vernacular, but they all have Torah scrolls in Hebrew. The Jew's connection to his language and culture has kept him distinct throughout thousands of years of wandering without a homeland. Therefore, the level of Paul's ability in Greek is quite beside the point. Before we move on, anybody want to comment on that?
I agree.
Well, it's kind of hard to not agree with him, in my opinion. I mean, I do agree with what he's saying, but I don't know exactly where he's going to end up yet.
The evidence discussed in Romans 5, verses 6 through 8 clearly points to Targuming infrastructure, which is in keeping with Jewish practices for both Aramaic and Greek, would have been most comfortable for Paul. If engaged in, that process would have, by necessity, involved Paul writing his letter in Aramaic and having the synagogue officials in Ephesus, or whatever assembly one was addressed to, translating it into Greek. Another support for this assertion is that there are two different ancient interpretations of an Aramaic idiom in Ephesians 1:18. It is reasonable to expect that, had Paul had done a definitive Greek rendering, such would have been more effectively passed down. In this case, the idiom is Anya de Lebwaktan, or the eye of your hearts. This was pretty cool, actually, which has no precedent in Greek. That's what Benjamin was saying. As a result, Alexandrian and Western manuscripts have had difficulty with the term, neutralized it into their vernacular as eye of your hearts may be enlightened, so as to put the meaning into a more Greek thought. By contrast, the Byzantine manuscripts retain the Semiticism as written, showing that the redactor understood the idiom. This should surely not be the case if Paul was writing perfect compositional Greek to a narrative Greek audience. Native, what did I say?
Narrative.
Narrative? Oh, I probably should have said naive. To a native Greek audience.
Naive Greek audience.
Yeah, right. So it's a pretty good point, if you ask me. So we deal with just a few. There are only a few Messianic scholars that have put forth any real meaningful work. It's not like the church fathers, and there's hundreds of them, and St. Augustus Potato Chip and whoever else that you got out there. They got so many. But I'm just saying, so you kind of have to rely on what they say, and you kind of have to compare it to what the church fathers say and other writings. And I got to say, I don't believe in this particular case that we're talking about the only people that want it to be so are Messianics because they want it to be so. They're the only ones that claim. I think there's better evidence than just saying that, and perhaps not a real thorough study done to come to that conclusion. That's my opinion.
And you look at the text here, it shows there is a split word between Greek text and the Byzantine manuscripts, as well as on one hand the Alexandrian on the other, and Western manuscripts, the Codex Diaphysite. And so, just because the thought is that the Byzantine manuscripts are, newer, but they seem to have a different, an understanding of the Aramaic, if that's where they translated from, better than the so-called earlier manuscripts of the Western text and the Alexandrian text.
Sure.
And again, the split word would indicate that they're translating from a common Aramaic text that they received. And Paul wrote in Aramaic to the leadership of the the Messianic community in Ephesus.
Which would have been Aramaic anyway, where it's located.
Ephesus is in modern day Greece, so but this doesn't necessarily mean that or modern day, not Greece, Turkey, yeah. So,
Yeah.
But I think Greek was a primary language there in that. But it could vary. But see, you're not really looking at, again, the common language as the issue. It's the language of you're writing a letter to the leadership of this place, and that may well have been Aramaic because it's considered more of a sacred text or sacred language. I mean, it's not Hebrew, but it's a more commonly spoken, because as we said before, from Acts 1:19, the language of Jerusalem was Aramaic in that sense, based on the words there.
And so we'll get into this. I mentioned all of those places that that are going to come into question. We're going to take a look at each one of those, starting with chapter 1, verses 12 and 13, which says that those who first hoped in the Messiah should be to the esteem of his glory. In him also you heard the word of truth, which is the good news of your life. In him you believed, were sealed with the Ruach HaKodesh, which was promised. And you can see the word at the top in yellow in the top sentence. Can anyone read that word?
You mean in Hebrew?
In Hebrew. Or Aramaic. It's Hebrew letters, but it's Aramaic word.
You need to make it bigger so I can see it better.
Savar or something.
Oh, very close. Yeah. Sabar. Yeah. Let's take a look at that. Here's an amazing wordplay which keys in multiple meanings of the same Aramaic root, which is sabar. In this case, two of those meanings, or trust, hope, or gospel, are directly tapped at the surface of the text. However, these are far from the only meanings that sabar has, since it can also be rendered as endure, preach, and declare, all being relevant. Endure appears as mesabrin in Ephesians 4:2. Preach appears as asabar in Ephesians 2:17, and declare is a secondary meaning, also appears asabar in Ephesians 3:8. So that's a grand total of 5 meanings derived from a single root, and this is just confining ourselves to a single letter. If we include the other epistles into this root analysis, we can easily add to this list several more meanings from the same powerful root, which is sabar, which is bear in 2 Corinthians, consider, 1 Corinthians, think, in 1 Corinthians, suppose, in 1 Corinthians. So the reason then Paul is so determined to exploit this root should be crystal clear. For if we think about grace, endure our trials, bear the pressure, declare the truth, consider our actions, suppose ways for our own improvement, and hope for good things with fervent faith, we can then be qualified to preach the gospel. What are your thoughts on that?
Head full of pudding, sorry.
Got it. Mine too. Yeah. So anyway, it's in my mind, it's textual evidence for it. So moving on to Ephesians 2:1. You were dead in your trespasses and sins. Wherefore remember that ye being in times past Gentiles in the flesh, who were called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision in the flesh made by hands. If the Ephesian believers were in time past Gentiles in the flesh, what are they in the present time or at the time of Paul's writing?
I'm pretty sure that modern day Christians would say that they're just circumcised of heart.
Go ahead.
Wouldn't it be one of the 3 levels of converts to Judaism? Because when Paul spoke in the synagogues, he wasn't just speaking to Jews. There were those, I can't think of the name that they called them, people that would come who were Gentiles who were learning.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on their level of commitment and where they weren't considered Jews until they reached that point of the righteous Gentile, or whatever you call that.
What I think Paul here is not going with that framework per se, because you see in a few verses he's going to say that these in this passage of time past Gentiles in verse 11 here, he's going to say that they are full citizens.
Yeah.
And so if you're in time past Gentile and now you're a full citizen, what is your status? He doesn't call them necessarily as Jews. He calls them full citizens with the saints or the righteous in that sense. So he's really talking about citizenship in what? I would say it's
Israel.
Israel.
Yeah.
They're full on citizens of Israel with, as much as any Jew is a citizen of Israel. He's right, of course. This is in Ephesus, which is technically part of Israel. He's using Israel, I think, in the wider sense of the remnant in this context. So he's saying that even though you're in time past Gentiles, meaning what you are currently is not a Gentile. You're now part of.
Well, that's where I was going with. I was just trying to show that they weren't necessarily Jews of birth, all of them.
No, right, I agree.
Yeah.
Because you're definitely
They're all
have
in
that.
the same now.
Yeah, they're going to have people who are God-fearers, I guess, would be the way of looking at it, who are in the synagogues, wanting to learn, what the
Studying
scriptures teach.
Yeah.
So it's a thing to say. It would never fly now in any Jewish circle, but it is to say, if you are in the Messiah, you are no longer a Gentile, right?
I think because at the time, Gentiles were associated with what? Paganism, right?
Yeah, you bet.
Greek culture is rife with paganism. I don't know of a more pagan culture than Greek culture.
When somebody read that, I think one of the interpretations was actually pagan and not Gentile.
Traditionally, isn't like in the Torah and the Tanakh, it seems like most of the time when the word Gentile is used, it's usually being equated with an idolater, like a pagan or an idolater.
In a derogatory manner.
Why is that? I think some people, we get a little wound around the axle over like non-Jew, like they're not ethnically Jewish.
Right.
But it seems to me like, especially in the Ketuvim Netzarim, it seems like it's usually using the term not to refer to your ethnic origin. It's referring to a lifestyle. It's referring to living without the Torah. And it seems like that's where Paul is going here in Ephesians.
So this week, it's interesting you mentioned that, because this week I didn't participate in conversation, but I read some social media posts from two people that I used to know pretty well that converted to traditional Judaism. And they both were saying something very similar, that even in traditional Judaism today, they're definitely not treated as if they had the same rights and background as born Jews, so to speak.
Exactly.
They're treated essentially as second class
Yep.
citizens. And it's not just that you're automatically, quote, magically a Jew when you convert. It's part of a process of becoming and walking more Jewish. But even with that sense, within traditional Judaism, there are some rules that now native-born Jews can't do that converts can do. One of which was mentioned was marry someone, a mamzer, that is open to converts, but is not open to native-born Jews.
Yeah, good point. All right. So moving on, by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God. So the point here is that salvation is the gift, not the faith. Just because you have faith doesn't mean you're owed your salvation,
Some
right?
people have taught that faith is the gift here. And so you don't believe because you haven't got the gift of faith.
Yeah.
But
How
that
do
is
we
not
get that?
from this verse.
I don't even get that out of that.
I don't get out of the verse either, but that's where it comes from.
Yeah, and that's something that is taught.
By grace you've been saved through faith. Then this is not for self, it is the gift of God. So it's saying that faith is the gift. In fact, the salvation is the gift here. I'm just saying that there's a teaching out there that says that faith is a gift. And that's why you don't have it. You don't have a gift.
No wonder they have problems.
Isn't it in, I don't know if it's in this Ephesians 2 or if it's Ephesians 1, isn't this where there's a lot of material used by the Calvinists and other Reformed churches to justify predestination?
Yeah,
There's a lot of material in
right.
what is used to
I
that
think
effect.
Ephesians 1, I think is where most comes from, but you're right. There's used that way in terms of, maybe it's this chapter 2. the idea, but the concept of transformation really is that you are predestined to become transformed to the likeness of Him. In other words, that all who believe are predestined to transform to the likeness, not that you're predestined to be in that transformation. I mean, I think I know many Presbyterians who would argue that's the real meaning of the predestination thing, not the hyper Calvinism sort of thing.
This specific verse is actually one that's been twisted by others, like the Mormons. They literally add to it that they put, "For we know that it is by grace that we've been saved after all we do," just to make it a works gospel.
Interesting. Moving on. At that time, you were separate from Messiah, excluded from the commonwealth of Israel. This is what Wayne was talking about. And strangers to the covenants of the promise, having no hope without God in the world. And so at the time, the Ephesians were separated from Israel and the Messiah, without the Elohim of Israel, strangers to the covenant of promise.
Covenant's plural.
Questions about that?
So in other words, if it's covenant is plural, it's not just talking about the new covenant, right? Which would expand beyond the traditional Christian thinking about that. Because covenants of promise go back to Abraham.
So Ephesians 2:14, He is our peace, who made the two of them one and loosed the hedge which stood in the middle. So the phrase "and loosed the hedge" in the Aramaic reads shara siaga, and was used as a technical halakhic term in Judaism. So shara was used to mean loose or permit, allow something to happen. Like in Matthew 18:18 and in various places of rabbinic literature. The term siaga appears in the Mishnah in Avot 1:1, make a hedge about the Torah. And so to loose the hedge would mean to permit activities that these hedge rules effectually discourage. What can we think about that we don't do, but is technically permitted, but we don't do because we don't want to get close to breaking a mitzvah? Can anyone think of anything?
Cooking on the Sabbath, I guess.
Well, the 18, traditionally you light the Shabbat candle 18 minutes prior to sundown, so you don't get close to breaking the idea of kindling the flame on Shabbat. That's a tradition.
It would be totally permitted to light it 1 minute before sundown, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, it's a good point. So then you're no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and are of God's household. Once again, we're talking about Israel, right? There's one Torah for the native born and the stranger who dwells within your gate. How much more is there one Torah for the believer in the Messiah, no longer a stranger to the covenants of promise? You got it right that time, covenants of promise. Verse 14, for He Himself is our shalom, our peace. He has made us both and has broken down the mechitza which divided us by destroying His own body, the enmity occasioned by the Torah, with its commands set forth in the form of ordinances. He did this in order to create in union with Himself from the two groups a single new humanity and thus make shalom, and in order to reconcile to God both in a single body by being executed on a stake as a criminal and thus Himself killing that enmity. So you can see here, what is the Greek word up there for ordinances that we're talking about? I have it written there in Greek. You can see it if you can read it.
Dogmasin.
Dogmasin.
It's all Greek to me.
It's all Greek to me. So what do we get? What do we get from dogmasin?
Dogma.
Very good. Anyone want to elaborate on that or talk about that?
Woof, woof.
What about the word that's translated in Hebrew there? That I think mechitza. What's your thoughts on that word, mechitza? What's that mean?
Pizza?
No?
Mechitza.
It's not
I'm playing word
mozzarella.
association. Mechitza and mozzarella. That's the same thing. My pizza and mozzarella. Mechitza is wall, so to speak. And mechitza, as he looks at it here, is the wall, if you will, that separates, in a traditional synagogue, men on this side, women on the other. Or in some places, men on the bottom floor and women in the balcony.
There were more demands.
Well, it depends on maybe what they did it for, I don't know.
Well, one of the things that I think Paul talks about in terms of disruptiveness is if in the synagogue you're meeting in, if there's a mechitza, there's a wall separating you. It's not necessarily a wall. It's usually like a
Curtain.
curtain. Yeah, exactly. You can see that it's usually, not, it's not going to the ceiling. So if the question about women asking their husbands at home about something really kind of relates to that in my view. It's not standing up or the whole thing, hey, what do you mean by that? In the middle of a synagogue service.
Depends on the woman.
Well, I think you still want to, I don't think it does. No, you want to do that at home in the privacy of your own home, not
Right, exactly.
not with in front of everybody saying, he means you're supposed to be quiet, woman. No, it's always saying.
That's where I was going.
What do you got?
This part, where it says two groups, single new humanity, this is the verse that a lot of people in the Messianic community and some even outside the community call one new man. That's a direction they're taking with that, to make the Jew and everyone else.
Yeah, I have heard that term, and in fact, you see the symbol there to the right side of the screen. That apparently is the symbol that means one new man. I didn't know that.
What symbol?
Shliach Ray pointed it out. You see on the right side of the screen right there?
Yeah.
That.
The temple menorah, the fish, and
Mogain
the
David.
bases of each, creating the Star David.
Interesting.
The thing is that particular symbol, I do know that it dates all the way back to the very early church. They found it in
My grandmother had
catacombs. They found it in catacombs in Jerusalem, dating back that far.
And
My grandmother
Jewish
had
ones,
one
Jewish
necklace.
synagogues.
They're really
What?
Yeah, this.
My grandmother had them on a necklace.
And
Nice.
it was
Those
a symbol
old-
And we,
yeah.
we have it
that
now.
specifically referred to
Cool.
what was at the time called the Way.
Oh, yeah.
How dare it?
Well, it's written on. They found some things in synagogues where, at least a synagogue, where that it's like a place for a jar that says "for the ruach of the Spirit" in Aramaic with that symbol in Jerusalem. I don't know how old it was, but pretty old.
Pretty old.
In destroyed synagogue.
So then you're no longer strangers and aliens, but you're fellow citizens with the saints and are of God's household. So if there's one Torah for the native born, one for the stranger who dwells within your gates, how much more? Did I have a copy here? I had almost two of the same slide, right? Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, moving on to chapter 3. To me, the least important of all God's holy people was given this privilege of announcing to the Gentiles good news of the Messiah's unfathomable riches and of letting everyone see how this secret plan is going to work out. This plan kept hidden for ages by God, the creator of everything. What is the secret plan or mystery hidden for the ages?
The making of the Jew into one new man, the Jew and everybody else into one new man.
Yep. It comes out to be Ezekiel's two-stick prophecy, right? Reuniting the lost tribes of Israel with Judah, Levi, and Benjamin.
I think so. In terms of the two-stick prophecy, it's Judah on one side, Judah, Levi, and Benjamin on one side, and of course Joseph on the other side. Make one stick.
Yeah.
We're not one stick right now.
And I know some Messianics who just cannot grasp the two-stick prophecy. Can't grasp it, can't put it together as relevant, if you will.
Well, it's so often been, I think, taught in a replacement theology way, whereas that the idea is, the idea that Israel still exists and it's separate from Judah because of British Israelism and things like that. where the queen is crowned queen of her people Israel, queen of my people Israel, and the idea that there's a replacement that Christianity has replaced Judaism is common within Christian thought. I think that the blessings of everything, blessings from the Torah go now to Christians and not to Israel. It's an idea that is pretty offensive, and so if you can't get past it in many cases, perhaps because of the historic anti-Semitism that goes with the British Israel movement.
Exactly.
And-
Makes it hard to swallow when you really hear it this way.
And I think that is it a design of Hasatan to do something like that, to pollute a right idea, to make it a stench in the nostrils of the Jewish people.
Which I agree there is two houses. I mean, I you can see that God split Israel. So that part doesn't bother me. What bothers me is the British Israelism, and when you've experienced something like that, you just really want anything that comes out that way. And I know that it was a big issue because Murray Silverman, his wife Kay, wrote the rebuttal for the two-house theory. Okay, well, in my experience, after having read that, and I know Murray a little bit, so I was in that congregation for a while. So it's just one of those things where you experience one side or the other, and with history and things of this nature, then you just want to I don't think I want to go down that road. I don't necessarily think it's a salvation issue, and it doesn't bother me if somebody wants to think they're from the tribe of Gad or not. It's fine with me. I mean, that's what you believe. That's perfectly fine. You might be. How do I know? I don't. I just don't think my salvation is based on if I'm from a tribe or not. If it makes somebody feel better that they feel they come from a different tribe and they're a part of this, so be it. Let them have it.
But it's the same idea. I think the same false idea that salvation comes from DNA, not faith. It's the same idea that when many were talking to Yeshua, saying, we're sons of Abraham. We don't have to. That idea still exists today. The sense of all Israel will be saved, and it goes that idea that if you're Israel, you're saved, and you become Israel by being circumcised. So that's not what I think what Paul or Yeshua is talking about.
Right.
In terms of salvation, Yeshua came teaching to the Jewish people.
To the Jew first, and then to the Gentile.
But by coming to the Jew first is saying that the Jews weren't doing it right, or they didn't have everything there. They were incomplete without belief in the Messiah.
Yeah.
And so he didn't acknowledge the idea that salvation is from by DNA because, go back to Korah. Korah wasn't, part of the remnant, so to speak. Same idea. He was just as Jewish as Moses and Aaron, right?
Yep. So, I mean, I agree. I just don't want people to think that, I guess, it doesn't matter to me. I do believe that there are two houses, so to speak, the two sticks. I do believe that. I just don't think that it's necessarily complete because I haven't seen it in my time.
Well, I think it's an unfulfilled prophecy.
Yeah, it's definitely an unfulfilled prophecy, mainly because it ties into Revelation where it says there will be this many people from this tribe and this many people from this tribe and this many people from this tribe to make the 144,000. And the only way that's possible is if people know what tribe they're from.
Yeah. To a degree.
The thing is every
Told though, you won't just
with the DNA stuff that is getting tracked, it's getting more and more specific. Where I'm pretty sure in the next couple of years, very possibly, they're going to be able to start figuring out which tribe that the Jews are from. Because even among the Jews, they're seeing differences. They just haven't been able to figure it out.
Differences, how would you determine what the differences mean?
Right.
If you don't know, well, this is the DNA for name a tribe. This is DNA for Benjamin. How do you tell that's Benjamin and not another one that's? I mean, Benjamin was not a good example because Benjamin is not really a lost tribe. But I mean, for, all the, how do you tell Naphtali from
Naphtali.
Zebulun? How do you tell Naphtali from Zebulun, right?
Right. But they are seeing differences even among Jews that doesn't relate to any other people group in the world.
I think that the dire need to belong to one of those tribes
You said it,
comes out of a Hebrew roots
yes.
kind
You said
of
it.
thing.
That's what I was
The need to believe
getting
that,
to.
yeah.
Yeah, the need to believe that I belong to the tribe of Reuben.
That I'm special.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's at the moment, it's neat, but it's a waste of time. It has no bearing on your salvation whatsoever.
Right.
In our liturgy, you're joined by doing what it says there. Loving his name, keeping the Sabbath.
That's exactly
Those
right.
things we say every week, that your sacrifice is accepted.
Yeah,
You
that's
don't
right.
have to shake the family tree and see if a Jew falls out.
I was thinking of another.
That's kind of funny, dude.
You said that another song popped in my head.
So, no offense to Hebrew roots folks, but I just can't get on board with it. And I probably all of us at one point in time thought, oh yeah, that's really something. But you study it for 10 minutes and you kind of go, oh yeah, we need to pull away from that.
So that's kind of where I was at, because I'd seen that firsthand. And in some of those cases, if you don't feel that way, they don't want you around.
Right.
So,
So moving chapter 3, verse 10 says that through the assembly, the manifold wisdom of Elohim might be made known to the principalities, to the powers which are in heaven. And so here the Aramaic word edah, which is a cognate of adat, which is assembly. Oh, we were just talking about this. Yeah. It corresponds to the Greek ecclesia. And so this prophecy come to fulfillment by way of the assembly. And that means all of us, right? Ephesians 4. There's one body, one spirit, just as you were called in hope of your calling. One Adonai, one faith, one immersion, one Almighty and Father of all, who is all over all and through all and in all. So there's one Spirit, so there can be none other, and one Master, so there can be none other. One Almighty, so there can be none other. One Father, so that there can be none other. The terms are not being used here in terms of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but in the sense that all of Elohim is Spirit, is Master, is Almighty, is our Father. You can't split the Father off off the end of the text and say it only means Father and not Son or Spirit, because there is one Spirit, and because the Father is Spirit and also Master, the Messiah is included in the fatherhood of the Almighty, because with him all things were made. Because that's a note from the Good News of Messiah translation, and yeah, and I read it about 3 times. Like, man, I really like that. And we're not talking about Trinitarian doctrine here. So let's see where we're at. Okay. Before we go to 4, 25, and 26, I had a slide built, and I guess it didn't. I noticed that when you were going through, I'm like, oh man, I'm missing this one slide. Yeah, I had it built. I might not have saved it. And then I moved on to something else. Can somebody pull out your Bible and look at, I'm just going to take a guess because I don't have my Bible here. Start chapter 4, verse 11, maybe go to 13.
There's a 4:8 slide.
Ephesians
In your thing. Didn't do.
4:11.
Yeah, go.
And he personally gave some to be apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers. That one.
That's the one. Yeah, that's what I want to talk about. So read that again, please.
And he personally gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors, and teachers for the training of the saints and the work of ministry to build up the body of Yeshua.
So I wanted to talk about this for just a second. This is where the Christian doctrine of the fivefold ministry comes from. What do you all think about the fivefold ministry?
I don't even know what it is.
I'm with you.
I can expound upon it. God's given me some revelation on this particular topic, but Yeah, this is 5 of them that happens within a church. In, I think, Colossians, there's a list. And from what I found, there's like actually 12 different named positions within the that fit within the church. But these 5 have very specific jobs that they do. But they're for the spiritual edification and training of the saints. Because we're all supposed to be ministers in one way or another.
Can you translate?
I'm asking, has anyone ever studied the fivefold ministry?
I don't even know what it is.
Seriously?
Apostles,
It's a big deal.
pastors, teachers, prophets. That's,
It doesn't make sense to me.
some people are meant to be.
So
apostles.
interestingly, it doesn't make sense to me either. But Christianity has created an entire doctrine called the fivefold ministry.
They don't even understand.
No, they understand something.
Oh, they understand something, but
Mhm.
they don't. It's not set up the way it talks about in Scripture.
So what's the doctrine? It just sounds like it's just naming people and what they may do, but that doesn't mean what it is.
It's a list of.
So it basically what it says
spiritual jobs within the
is,
church.
if you are in a fivefold ministry church, you must fall into one of those categories.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the revelation I've been given on this particular thing is these 5 are the spiritual,
This is the basis of the.
Right. the spiritual leaders of the church. Yes. And no, not everybody falls into one of these 5 because there's
Absolutely.
actually 12.
Well, they don't call it the 12-fold ministry.
Oh, I know, but this is what I mean.
So you didn't name the sheep.
Sheep. Oh, Lord. Maybe I should. I'm glad I left this slide out.
Is it maybe akin to that belief
Somebody's
that floats around different Messianic churches that if you're going to
Actually,
Sabbath,
the
you
Bible
must be
specifically
Jewish,
says that all of us are
something like
supposed
that.
to preach.
Is that kind of akin
Sorry.
to that?
No, it's really not. It's just that it's just the
All
belief
of
that
us.
if you are a Christian, you have to fit into one of these categories right here.
Yeah, that's not.
There's no
It
such
doesn't even
thing
say.
as
It
a
doesn't
lay
say that.
person.
It just says. It
Right.
says some are apostles. Some
There's no
are
such thing as somebody who just comes
prophets,
to learn
pastors, teachers, and
and lives a good life, right? Have you ever looked at it, messed with it? Okay,
No
We'll mess
wonder
that-
it fit in.
I'll mess with it a little bit later. I just thought somebody might have some experience with it
yes, I have quite a
He's
bit of
probably
experience.
the only one that does that.
Yeah, I'm probably-
because
It
it's
usually
yeah.
boils down to, I don't have a certain minister gift, then the rebuttal back to you would be, hey, even just living your life as a minister.
First
Yeah.
Thessalonians.
We're
chapter
supposed to
4.
preach, but preaching can be the way you live your life, but it's also supposed to be in words. It's supposed to be both.
Sounds like dogma to me.
Sounds like dogs.
Very good.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on, Ephesians 4:25 and 26. Therefore, laying aside falsehood, speak truth, each one of you, with his neighbor, because we're members of one another. Be angry, and yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. Do not give the accuser an opportunity. So verse 25 is drawn from Zechariah 8:16, verse 26 from Psalm 4:5 or 4, if you versification difference. So what is the opportunity given to the accuser by failing to abide by this? It's a good question.
Enmity, I think. I mean, if you don't reconcile, you go to sleep on that, and then
You stew on it
you still want to become more self-righteous in it, I think, saying,
and maybe speak out some sin. I've done it.
Or do something about it that would be sin.
I've done it.
Yeah.
yeah, usually like spiteful words afterwards.
I might have even done it to some of you, so I beg your forgiveness at this moment.
That's okay.
Thank you, Jim.
We're good. It went over my head anyway.
No, it didn't. Chapter 5. Since anything revealed is a light, this is why it says, "Get up, sleeper, arise from the dead, and the Messiah will shine on you." First, this is likely drawn from Isaiah 61 and 2, although some have proposed that Paul is referencing a contemporary hymn or song. What does Isaiah 61 and 2 say? You guys don't have the Bible memorized?
I'm sorry.
Can somebody pull it up? Because I don't either. Go ahead, pull it up. I did read this.
Yeah.
60, verse 1, 2.
Yeah.
I know you'll recognize it.
I actually know what the beginning of that one is in Hebrew.
Say it.
Spit it out.
Isn't that one that
Oh.
starts, it's Kumi Ori, I think,
Kumiori.
Arise, shine, for your light is come, and the glory of the Lord shines over you.
like one of the 15 words I know.
For look, darkness covers the earth, and total darkness
Very good.
the people, but the Lord will shine over you.
And interestingly, today it is a hymn or a song, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's one I know.
I would say this is Paul definitely, in my personal opinion, he's definitely referencing Isaiah 60 in this.
But it could also have been a hymn at the same time.
Could have been a
Probably
hymn. Yep,
Just
absolutely.
like you're saying it now.
Sung by the
Even back
Shlomones.
then, they took
Sung by
Bible
the
verses
Shlomones,
and turned them
yeah.
into songs.
Playing the air banjo.
Yes, sir.
Even back then, they took verses and turned them into songs.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
Best way to do it.
So let's talk about this a little bit about this here really quick. We can really go off on a tangent on these next few, but submit to one another and fear the Messiah. Wives should submit to their husbands as they do to the Lord, because the husband is the head of the wife. Just as the Messiah is the head of the Messianic community, is himself the one who keeps the body safe. Just as the Messianic community submits to the Messiah, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. As far as for husbands, love your wives just as the Messiah loved the Messianic community, indeed gave himself up on its behalf. Somebody pull up 1 Corinthians 11:3, please. 1 Corinthians 11:3. How do you come to Bible study without a Bible?
Like this.
You lose it?
Wearing a
Can't
red
find
shirt,
it,
that's
somebody
how.
borrowed it, you can't-
Somebody
But I
bought it.
want you to know that Christ is the head of every man, and the man is the head of every woman, and God is the head of Christ.
So in this case, wives should submit to their husbands as they do the Lord. As for husbands, love your wives. The asymmetry in these commands epitomizes the asymmetry in the marriage relationship. So Paul could have said, wives, love your husbands, and husbands, rule over your wives. Men often find it all too easy to throw their weight around, but hard to communicate love sensitively in a self-giving fashion. For the standard Shaul sets is very high, just as the Messiah loved the Messianic community. Likewise, women often find it easy and natural to express love, but difficult to accept their husband's authority. Feminist objection to wifely submission is premised on the assumption that the husband does not obey the injunction to love his wife as the Messiah loved the Messianic community. Advice for believing wife with an unbelieving husband is found in 1 Peter 3:1-6. In self-oriented marriages, arguments are between men who won't submit to their husbands and men who won't love their wives. In God-oriented marriages, arguments happen.
Wait a minute. Did I hear you
He
correctly?
said men submit
To their husbands?
Did I say?
Yeah.
Women submit to their husbands. Women who won't submit to their husbands
You're in the modern times.
and men who won't love their wives. In God-oriented marriages, arguments happen, but they have altogether different character because they're between men willing to go the second mile in loving women, and women willing to go the second mile in submitting. In such marriages, Yeshua is the third partner. Like a magnet over iron filings, he orders things in the right direction. Elsewhere, Paul says the head of the wife, we just read that, 1 Corinthians 11:3. Being the head, he's responsible to go first, to create the order of married life. But to do this, he must be loving first, unconditionally, without waiting and insisting on his wife's submission first.
As one wife said, when you give your life for me, I will give you my undying honor and submission.
So I'm afraid we have a societal problem here, honestly. And I can't pinpoint back.
You said men and husbands.
Yeah. I'm read through it fast and I'm getting tired. So what I'm trying to tell you is that we have a societal problem here that, well, number one, it's interesting that men have to be commanded to love their wives because it's just not in our nature. And that in my particular opinion is a proven point that love is a choice. And I get that. And love is a choice. But men are not acting honorably in many occasions. And now we've gotten to a point in our society where we teach our young women growing up, you don't need a man. You can be self-sufficient. You can do all these things. You can be the CEO of a corporation. You can do whatever. You don't need a man to help you do anything. You are just as strong as he is, and you can do everything he can do.
Unless you're in sports.
Yeah, oh yeah, even in sports, because that's what they're telling us now, right? There's no difference between a man and a woman is where we are right this minute. I'm telling you, we have a bad problem.
Yes, we do.
And it's and all of us here have may perhaps have a piece of that also. If what I mean is there are God-given roles for men and women, and he lays it out the way it's supposed to be. I don't care about the oddball woman who can bench press 400 pounds. They exist. I get it. That's great.
Really?
But on average, they are not as strong as men. Hence, why are 99% of men on road crew? Why is it 99% of the workers on a road crew men building roads or building tall buildings? They simply cannot do it. So the feminists has caused a real problem. And as we move farther and farther away from belief in the Almighty, these roles disappear even farther. And we have a problem. Our young ladies are not taught that it's an honorable thing to be a housewife. They're not taught that it's an honorable thing to take pride in keeping your house clean, keeping the laundry done, doing these housewife things, cooking as best as you possibly can.
Often more tough than the man's job.
Yeah, they're not taught this anymore. What are they taught? It's a burden, and I don't want to do it, and I shouldn't have to do it. This is a problem, and I can really get on a soapbox, but I just for me personally, I long to be in a community of people where honorable men take their place as the head of their house and don't rule over their wives, but love them. In my personal opinion, it should be that a man should talk over these important decisions with his wife, and then the husband should make the decision. And even if it's not what the wife would want, it's her job to support him in whatever he decided. Even if it's wrong, he should consult her and he should talk to her, and they should talk about it, but it's his job to make the decision. And that's the end of it. Now, I know that is not a popular opinion, and if I had Facebook, I could be canceled.
Fact checkers.
That's why you don't have Facebook.
That's why I don't have Facebook. Yeah, exactly. I don't think.
You can parse, that could get into some parsons too. What if my husband, and they'll go to the extreme. What if my husband tells me to kill this person?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Why haven't?
and it will go, and the argument will go extreme like that. Well, my husband's not a believer, so I don't have to listen to him.
It's not what the Bible says.
Yeah. I'm just saying we have a problem. We're not going to fix it here tonight. We're not going to fix it in the next 50 years.
Or a abusive situation.
But I'm just saying, my nefesh longs to be a part of a community that respects those traditional roles, where you know what your role is, and just like the people who were craftsmen and artisans building the temple, they took pride in what they did. Do you think the people we read about today, the sons of Gershon, who were responsible for carrying the tabernacle and all its vestments, you think they just rolled it up in a ball, threw it in a cart, and rolled out?
Stuffed it in a laundry basket.
Stuffed it in a laundry basket and rolled out with it? I dare say they took great pride and care.
Maybe even had some ceremony involved.
Yeah, we don't have proof of that, but yes, that's absolutely logical, reasonable to believe that.
I mean,
That they do their best at whatever they do.
the people were told to stop giving because they'd given more than was needed.
Right. Exactly. So that's what I'm just saying. Just for me, this is just a personal. Yeah. What got something? Go ahead.
Okay, I think what the problem is that people misunderstand what the different, they tend to think of submissive as completely obedient to literally everything you say.
I mean, like subjugation,
Yes.
like
Or a slave mentality.
Yes, and I think that's what people have the problem with it.
That's an excellent point, and I'll submit this. I think that's what they say, so that they can get away with not doing anything. But I don't think any rational person really believes that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I
But
think
that's
it
what
is.
they say. That's what they say they
So
believe it
good.
is. What do you
And
think?
to admit
And
that what you're describing is the
But then
right
get
way,
right
the
back
natural
up.
way would be to
Yeah.
admit that there is a God.
That's exactly right, Jim. Exactly right. And they're not about to admit that God set this up. Anyway, I apologize for wasting your time on that, but it's near and dear to my heart.
Can I take that tangent just a little bit different? Something I've seen or thought about in this regards is like in the military, officer. Everybody down here, all the enlisted have to submit to that officer, even if they make a stupid choice. They can give them advice and whatnot, but it's still the officer's decision.
But he can't give an illegal order.
And he can't
Yeah,
get it right. But which actually is in some ways better than what a lot of marriages turn out, because the husband keeps doing things he's not supposed to do or
Giving illegal orders.
giving illegal orders, right?
Fiddler on the roof.
Amen.
So in my thinking, if you think about the husband's an officer, whereas the wife is like sergeant major, I mean, she knows what's good and will tell you all about it. But if you want to act like a lieutenant,
Well, even in the Army, they
It's
call
gonna
the
go
wife
bad.
household six.
You're
so-
saying it should be household seven.
You're saying, yeah, she should be household 7 from now on. Moving on to chapter 6, I think I only got 1 or 2 slides on this. Children, what you should do in union with the Lord is obey your parents, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother. This is the first commandment that embodies a promise so that it may go well with you and you may live long in the land. Fathers, don't irritate your children and make them resentful. Instead, raise them with the Lord's kind of discipline and guidance. Of course, down below, I've got these comments. Verse 2, you can find in Exodus 20:12, Devarim 5:16. Verse 3, you can find in Devarim 5:16. And the context of the passage indicates that the passage would be rendered land, as in honor your father and mother, as Adonai your God ordered you to do so that you will live long and have things go well with you in the land Adonai your God is giving you. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't honor our parents here because we're not in Israel, in the land? No, it absolutely does not. Does it mean that we should not honor our parents if, for example, my mother was very abusive and I don't have very many fond memories? Should I still not honor her? In some way? I should, right? You know-
Honor is separate than obey.
Yeah.
yeah, that's.
But also, even though a person, and I just made this up. I'm just saying it was an example. But even if we're in the middle of a Midrash, buddy. So even if you did have those bad memories, that kind of thing, one cool thing that I wanted to make note of that the United States has done, and if anybody ever found out about it, they would probably cancel it. But we have once a year a way to obey that commandment, right?
Mother's Day.
Mother's Day and Father's Day.
Mhm.
That's the day we honor our moms and dads. And I think if anybody ever put that together with giving us a way to keep that commandment, boy, they would get rid of it in a heartbeat. So let's not tell them. Now it's on the internet, so everybody's going to know because everybody watches the Tefillah Midrash. Verses 13 to 16, therefore take up the whole armor of God. So we know what this is. I just wanted to say this is about the spiritual warfare here. I like what Stern wrote down here. I want to kind of skip down about 3/4 of the way through that it says, unbelievers are taken aback by the apparent triumphalism of the old song, Onward Christian Soldiers. To understand that the soldiers in this song, that is the believers in Yeshua, are not fighting to force believers to convert, but to overthrow demonic principalities and powers by God's prescribed methods. So truly it is a spiritual warfare, and we're not out here to try to force people into conversion. In fact, we don't proselytize at all in Beit Tefillah. Typically, people come to us seeking knowledge or truth. We don't go out and try to stand on the corner and
Perhaps you should.
maybe we should. Yeah, right. I think I think Trim would agree with you. We should go door to door, knocking on doors, trying to get to get folks. But
When you stand in front of Chick-fil-A.
we typically, I can neither confirm nor deny. But anyway, it is a spiritual battle, and you don't necessarily have to beat people over the head, but you do have to. What is the best weapon right now we have against these spiritual forces?
Prayer.
Prayer. That is the best way. And so I would say, I would encourage everyone to do what you can to increase your prayers, especially for some of the evil things that are happening, even especially in our country, that soon may come back to bite us pretty hard, or we won't be able to meet like this to study anymore. So I encourage everyone to start praying that. And if I do this, I'll ask you to do. You don't have to, but pray that God utterly destroys all of the evil in our government, wipes it out. And honestly, the repercussions of that, if you think about it, if he decided to do it, I mean, it's going to be bad for us all when he does it, but it has to be done, right? It can't be done slowly and methodically, little piece by piece. I guess God can do whatever he wants. He has the power. I'm not trying to put a limit on him, but man, I think it's pray that it is all utterly destroyed.
It has to be. It's so ingrained.
Last thing, why is Philemon part of the canon of Scripture? And I had it. Did you change it? I had it CANNON because I was going to make a howitzer joke. Did you change it?
I did change it.
Oh man. Okay. Never mind. All right. Joke's over. Why is Philemon part of the canon of Scripture? I thought I had it on. Wait a minute here.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. All right.
You saw the misspelling of it. Hey, we did.
Philemon, a friend of his?
It is on the screen here. It's two ends.
Oh, I can't see it.
Oh, is it? Okay. Cool.
So you can make your howitzer joke.
Oh no. It's over. Too late now.
Come on.
Why is it? I mean, I read through it like six, 7 times over the past few days.
I'm gonna take a shot in the dark.
Yeah.
Is it because Philemon was with Paul when he wrote it, or he was sending a letter out?
There was a letter to Philemon. No? Or
Let's do it. Onesimus.
Because
It was to Philemon.
He's laying about Onesimus.
Because he listed a friend in Ephesus or something.
I think it's just part of a collection of letters that Paul wrote. Even though it was like an individual letter, not to the community,
I see.
but it does have some doctrinal things that I think you can look at in terms of, what is the idea? What's the idea, or what's the position of Paul?
But it was
on
about slaves
slavery.
and masters.
Yes. Why didn't Paul foment a slave revolt in his letter to Onesimus, or to Philemon about Onesimus?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Why didn't he start a slave revolt?
He didn't even start a slave revolt because he told him to go back.
Yeah, it's the opposite, actually. I mean,
To reconcile, yes, both as believers, not to go back and,
Right.
he didn't say go back and kill the master, so to speak,
Right.
yeah.
which would be a slave revolt.
Well, one thing I think it does is it gives us an example on how to be. It certainly, if you are in a position to affect the life of someone else in a positive way without causing any harm, you should do so. One thing I find interesting about Paul's letter is, please, if he owes you any money, put it on my account. I will pay it. But I don't have to remind you that you owe me your life.
Yeah.
Well, is that not a typical Jewish guilt trip right there?
It's a guilt trip for anybody.
Right. So what I personally got out of it, just so after 6 or 7 times, or 5 to 7 times anyway, is it gives us an example. If you can possibly, if you have any pull with someone that you can help someone's life, you should take the step. Not necessarily put that guy in danger. I don't think Paul would have sent him back if. It's quite possible that whatever he did, if he stole something from his master or whatever the case is, that he could be killed for it. So I think Paul
Just as
had
an escaped slave.
that's what that's just an example. If he had done something, if he owes him something, because that's why Paul mentioned, if he owes you something, I'll pay it back. All right, I'm good for it. So maybe he stole something, maybe he didn't. But I'm saying I think it's in the canon so that we can have an example of how we should be. If you can influence someone to make someone else's life better, I think we should do it. Anyone disagree with that? Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, I think another reason why was to prove that Paul was not a hypocrite in his own writings.
To prove that Paul was not a hypocrite.
So how would that
Because
make-
the Torah talks about slavery, even though it's technically a short-term thing, but it's like,
It's not necessarily what we think of in early American history slavery either.
Yeah.
right, it's not the same thing. Not quite.
More like indentured servitude.
But this one was probably not the same way.
Yeah, maybe not,
Maybe
because we're in
not.
Ephesus,
Yeah.
right?
Which brings up the question, why would sending them back and telling them to go back be bettering their lives?
Well,
For the master's sake, probably, in terms of.
So see if-
That's what I was thinking, would that be if the master was a believer too?
so yeah,
That's-
Philemon, in fact, he hosted a congregation in his house, right? So he was a believer in Yeshua the Messiah. So it's basically, here's a way you
Like
can,
right up there.
here's a way you can keep Torah by not treating this man harshly. I'm sending him back to you.
So both of them could
This is the right thing to do.
slave would go back, and the master would treat him right.
Treat him like an equal, I think is what's going on.
Yeah.
Because he pointed out that he's now a brother.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like when he left, he may not have been.
Yeah, interesting. Anyway, has anyone ever thought about Philemon before? I know, right? We studied Torah for 20 years without,
Only in small ways, yeah.
yep. So anyway, it was interesting and, in my opinion, refreshing to read. Anything anyone would like to discuss?
I have something I'd like to send to you at some point. I've done a reiteration of the full armor as cowboy paraphernalia.
Well, unblock my email and you can get it to me that way.
I get your email.
I'm just messing with you,
It's
buddy.
just reading email. It's just, unless it's something I'm specifically looking for.
He'll look at the text.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, there is a question about the full armor. Some people believe that Paul was reiterating what he saw the Roman soldiers wearing right outside his door as they were guarding him. But there's others that believe that he was referring back to the outfit of the high priest.
And language taken mostly from Isaiah, right? It's good. It's a good point. All right, that's it. Let's pray and safely go home, right? Abba, Father, we are truly thankful that we could come and discuss your scriptures. We thank you for them. We know that they strengthen us. We pray, Father, that you can give each one of us the knowledge and to know how to apply them to our lives. And please help us to share it with others. Pray, Father, that you get everyone here home safely. Everyone has a great week in service to you and none other. We pray this in the name of Yeshua the Messiah. Amen. 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 Thanks, everyone. Ooh.
Last comment, Cece said, I thought it was interesting that the issue of how to treat a slave was better handled by Paul than it was until it was abolished much later by different nations.
Was that from CC?
That's an excellent comment.
So I thought it was interesting that the issue of how to treat a slave was better handled by Paul than it was until it was abolished much later in other nations.
If you think about it, a deal with Blair.
Who's with, thank you, JD. For the great.
Who said that? Oh, thanks, Cece. Calling it a great teaching. Yeah, that was pretty good.